Mac Power Users, episode 667, Revisiting Apple Reminders and Notes. Hello, everyone. This is David Sparks. I am joined, as always, by Stephen Hackett. How you doing, Stephen?
I'm good, David. How are you?
I am good. Today, we are going to be covering a topic that has been on our outline for a while. I think we're both kind of looking forward to it. Apple's made a bunch of changes with notes and reminders. Now that all the operating systems are out, it gives us a chance to dive deep on that. That's exactly what we're going to do today. But first, we've got a little housekeeping. We want to thank everyone who ordered the merch. The merch sale has now officially ended. I got my notice. I've been charged. I can't wait to get my shirts. And just thank you, everybody who stepped in. I was really happy with the merch we were able to offer this year, and I hope you like yours when it shows up.
Yeah, I'm excited to get mine. I got a couple t-shirts and I got a sweatshirt for the first time.
Yeah, me too. Because I do a lot of recording for the MacSparky Labs, I thought it'd be fun to wear some branded merch when I do those recordings. So I got several pieces.
There you go.
And today on More Power Users, Stephen built a charging station. Hey, we're going to talk about that. Also, I just wanted to know, word went out on Friday at MacSparky. I've got a sale going on. You know, it's that week, where you get all the sale notices. Well, I'm doing them this year too. On the MacSparky field guides, you can get 20% off any of them. And also, for the first time, I'm doing a weird thing. I'm giving 20% off a membership purchase for the MacSparky Labs just for this week. So I'll put links in the show notes. You can check that stuff out.
There's it's a secret time. Well, it's not really a secret. Hosts know we're doing the same thing on Relay. So I'll put something in the show notes for that too. It's that time of year,
Yeah, it is, right?
That time of year.
I don't always do them. Like I take several years off at a time on these sales. But this is the year for me. I feel like I need to do it and it'd be fun. And, so it's up, and just look at the links and you'll get the details. But let's get into Apple Notes and reminders. And Stephen and I were talking before we started recording, and he was talking about when he made the outline, he added a section called A Little History. And man, I think that is an important discussion point here with these two apps in particular.
Yeah, they've come such a long way. So I felt like it was important just for a couple of minutes to talk about where they started. And the Notes app in particular started way back in 2007 or so with the original iPhone. And I dug up John Gruber's iPhone First Impressions blog post, which I don't know about you, but when I read this, I was like, I cannot believe this is how the first iPhone was. I mean, it seems so basic and so simple. And he brings up the Notes app, and a direct quote is that he despised it, mostly because of the font choice. They used marker felt, and it didn't sync with anything, right? It was basically just like a kind of a sticky note stack you could keep on your phone, and it was very simple and very straightforward. And around the same time, or a little bit after that, Apple was playing with Notes on the Mac, but they were within the Mail application. So I have a screenshot in the show notes from Mountain Lion that shows like notes and tasks inside of Mail. It's very strange.
Yes. Yeah, I remember those days.
Very weird. But with Mountain Lion, it finally did become its own application, and it would sync via IMAP. So it was like the notes were like a folder, and they were kind of like email drafts, and they'd sync around with IMAP. It was all very strange and very fragile, very basic. But back in 2015, they got serious about it with iOS 9 and El Capitan. Notes really got the overhaul and turned into what we know today, more or less.
Yeah, I mean, I really think that the original intention around Notes was to be like almost sticky notes kind of philosophy, just like a thing on your phone that you could write some things down. Like if you wanted to go to the grocery store, very, very basic implementation. And I really think that was just all they wanted to do with it. And they started giving you syncing in the way that Apple gave you the bumper cases, remember when when we had the what was it, the antenna gate, and he's like, "You want a bumper? We'll give you a bumper."
Yeah.
And I feel like syncing and notes was the same. You want syncing? We'll give you syncing. We're just going to attach it to IMAP, so just like your email. I mean, it's just like it was very half-hearted for a long time, and like even that font. I mean, I just can't imagine anybody at Apple with its design experience liking that font, but maybe it was like a statement of intention. Like, yeah, you're not going to use this to do serious writing. It's just,
I don't know, man. I mean, Jobs used marker felt and a bunch of other stuff in his slides back in the day. So I think maybe he liked it.
Yeah, that's true. but the big point of this history lesson, I think, is that there was a change in philosophy at Apple at some point where they said, you know what, there's all these notes apps out there. We're going to compete with those guys. And like Apple Notes went from like a text toy to an actual application.
100%. And I think it's interesting that reminders started in a very different place. I mean, like if you go way back, I didn't even include this, but if you go way, way back, like Panther, Tiger somewhere, you could have tasks like in the sidebar of iCal. Do you remember that? You'd have like the right-hand side. You could have some tasks in there.
Well, you still can put task support into calendar apps. I mean, Fantastical does it now. But, but it was there was a dark time. You know, Star Wars fans call the time the Empire was in charge the dark days. There were dark days on the Mac with task management, and it was right in around that Tiger era and the years before where Apple didn't have a solution, and there weren't very many third-party solutions either. I mean, I remember like it was big news when somebody made a task manager app, and there were very few of them. And then suddenly, the deluge began, and now there's a lot of options. But Apple really didn't take advantage of those times of making a competitive task manager app. But Reminders again started, I believe, kind of as just like, oh well, you want something to write down, your ingredients for your gumbo. Here's a place to do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it got its own Mac app with Mountain Lion. Like, go look at the screenshot. It's like dark leather or something. It was a very different time in UI design.
Yeah.
But Reminders kind of got the big overhaul a couple of years ago with iOS 13. And it went from this kind of goofy design that, I mean, do you remember? It kind of looked like a Rolodex. Like you would have your list in like a vertical view and you could tap into them. And it was, again, very basic, very straightforward. But starting with iOS 13, they really became more powerful.
Yeah, I mean, at the time, I think we called it getting the Apple Notes treatment, right?
Yeah.
Just like Apple Notes went from a toy to a practical working application, Reminders did too. And they are both now so much more than what they used to be. And I think that's the main reason we're making today's show, because I think a lot of people probably judged Apple Notes in the marker felt days or Reminders in those early listed days. And that's no longer the case. These apps are for real, and they're powerful and have a lot of features that for people may just be enough for them to get this stuff done without having to go to a third-party application.
Yeah, Apple has slowly been raising that bar, I think, where, okay, in the beginning, 2007, okay, the Notes app is really simple. It's the only thing on the phone. But there was an explosion of Notes apps in the early App Store because Apple Notes was so simple. And over time, as Apple's apps have gotten better, more powerful, more flexible, the reasons you would go to a third-party app, I think that list is getting shorter and shorter. And there's still a lot of people who need third-party apps, right? And really, we've talked about this a lot. We're in a renaissance of note-taking apps right now.
Yeah.
But for most users, like, as much as I would like to think, most iPhone users don't listen to MPU. The vast majority do not. For a bunch of people, they should.
Yeah.
Go tell your friends. But for a lot of people, more and more people every year, these are enough for them.
Yeah. I mean, the way I like to think about it is like on a spectrum, let's say of 1 to 10, where, 1 is the most basic app and 10 is the most advanced application with the most features. And notes and reminders really started in the 1 to 2 range. I mean, they really were that basic. And maybe it was a Steve Jobs thing where he said, like, people don't want to learn, you know, they don't have to learn how to make their list. They know how to make a list. That's kind of his simplicity that he, that permeated the company during his lifetime. But at some point, they said, people do want more features. People are getting more advanced with these things. And as people kind of grow up using this technology, they want more out of it. And I feel like these apps are much more in the 5 to 7 range now, which is, intermediate and in some cases beyond. And that does a couple things. Number one is I think it makes the advanced apps stand out more because they do things that these apps don't do. But it makes the other intermediate apps have to really fight for this business, because if you get something that's built into the operating system and has all the advantages and the benefits of that, like Siri voice control and the stuff that these Apple apps do better than anything else, plus an intermediate set of features, suddenly the market is getting gobbled up by the native apps. And that's kind of where we stand now. So let's talk about our history with these apps, Stephen. What is your relationship with notes and reminders historically and as we stand here today?
Yeah, so before iOS 9, I jumped around to a bunch of notes apps. I used Simple Note, Evernote, a bunch of those like markdown text editors that were around for a long time. But really with iOS 9 and El Cap, when Notes got good in 2015, I moved everything into Notes. And since then, I've played with other things. Listeners remember that for a while I was using Craft for work notes and Notes for personal stuff, and kind of gave up on that because I had a lot of stuff like I didn't know where it should go. So everything's just back in Apple Notes now. I currently have almost 400 notes across 20 different notebooks in Notes. So I'm using it pretty heavily, and it's my go-to for simple checklist, for writing simple things, having research that I'm working on. I've got notes for tracking basically anything you can think of, I have in Apple Notes now, and I've been really happy with it. Well, what about you? Where do you land with Notes?
I've been there from the beginning. I mean, I'm always interested in the Apple apps. I want to see what they're doing, but it never stuck with me, of course, like in the Marker Felt days.
Yeah.
But early on, I was recommending it to my wife and friends that were getting iPhones that weren't like Mac Power users, kind of demographic people. It's a very basic app. And then it started to get more powerful. And I keep looking at it. I really feel like of all the Apple native apps, Notes is the one that has the biggest place in my life. When it comes to Notes apps, currently, I am breaking all the rules. Like I have multiple buckets. I have people that work with me to make the MacSparky content for, the various things I do. We use Craft for that because I can just share the entire database with the people on the team. They can access anything. It has great linking and it has great URL linking. So I can send, I can Slack JF and say, could you check this paragraph? And I can give them a link in Craft and it goes directly to that paragraph, and you just can't do that with something like Apple Notes. But at the same time, I've always had this affinity towards Obsidian, and it's really grown into my kind of external brain kind of notes database. But it's the heavy stuff I'm thinking about, like the thought generation and connections and like the stuff that Obsidian's so good at. And I found that when I was doing searches in Obsidian about, kind of deep thoughts things, I didn't really want the notes showing up for the last time I took the dog in for her shots, right? So the veterinarian notes, stuff like that, I was putting everything in Obsidian, and I felt like it was kind of garbaging up the database. And don't write me, I know you can do separate vaults and all that, but I just decided at one point to put just kind of the personal life note stuff, like tools I want to buy, Christmas gifts I'm going to give, the dog's veterinarian records, the mileage on the cars, stuff like that. Mm-hmm. I just put into Apple Notes, and that migration started, I don't know, about 6 months ago. Now there's 115 notes in Apple Notes that are just kind of the personal stuff. So I have things in 3 databases now. I know this is making people cringe, but it's very easy for me to understand. If it's teamwork stuff, it goes in Craft. If it's personal, non like heavy thinking stuff, it goes in Notes, and everything else goes in Obsidian. And that works for me. And I kind of like having them segregated, because then I don't have one kind of thing junking up another kind of thing. As we've been prepping for the show, I've also been using Notes for collaboration on a couple projects I'm working on with people. And I'll talk about that more later in the show. But yeah, I've been trying the collaboration. I'm always spending time in these applications. So Notes it's a daily driver for me now for personal stuff, and I'm very happy with it.
For me, Reminders was an app that I basically would check in once a year. And then starting with iOS 13, I would check in a couple of times a year as it got much better over time. And really starting this summer after WWDC, after I had the betas on a bunch of stuff, I spent an afternoon moving my stuff into Reminders. And I wrote this post at the time that went pretty wide and actually got something fixed in Reminders where I could change the way the badge worked the way that I wanted to. So thank you, Apple Reminders team, for listening to my feedback. And I've been actually in Reminders ever since. I'd used Todoist for probably the better part of like 7 or 8 years. But I really have found, like we talked about a second ago, the bar has risen enough with Reminders that it works for me. And some of its features, nothing else matches. We'll talk about this in a little while, but some of the ways you can be reminded of a task, because Reminders is basically built into the OS, nothing else does. And so it's my daily driver now. So I'm fully in with Apple Reminders and Notes.
Yeah, people in the MacSparky Labs are going to know about this because I shared a bunch of videos at the time. But 2 months ago, I spent like a month really trying to get Reminders. And this is the new, Ventura iteration while it was still in beta, I believe, but very recently, trying to get it to replace OmniFocus for me. OmniFocus has been my task manager for like 10 years. And I thought, well, maybe I could, use Reminders. It's simpler. I think it's prettier. I like the way it displays lists, and it does have some of those built-in features with Siri, and the way it pops up reminders in unusual places that no other app can do. So I really like those features. I thought, well, maybe I could pull this off. I spent the better part of a month trying to make it work, and in the end, it didn't stick for me. And we'll talk about that because honestly, this is a 5 to a 7 app, and I need a 10 app, and I've got used to the features of a 10 app. Maybe OmniFocus is an 11, because there's just so much I can do with it that I can't do with Reminders. But it is a very good app, and like just using it, there were parts of it that I really wanted to stick with it, but ultimately it didn't work for me. But I'm deep in Reminders because I've spent so much time working in it recently. This episode of the Mac Power Users is brought to you by 1Password. Go to 1password.com/MPU in all caps to get 20% off. Stephen and I are both big fans of 1Password because it protects us on the internet, and that is increasingly difficult to do. If you read the news, you'll see that a lot of the recent data breaches aren't because of some guy digging through the code and finding a vulnerability, but because of social engineering. Increasingly, hackers are exploiting human psychology rather than technical vulnerabilities. There's a couple ways they do this. One is through phishing, where they pretend to be someone and they're not, like your bank. They send you a very convincing email that says you need to reset your password or type your password in so they can fix something with your account. If you do your two-factor authentication via SMS, that's another way they get you. They just duplicate your SIM and they get the two-factor authentication sent to them. And they also do it with what they call bombardment, where they send you a ton of two-factor authentication notifications until finally you just give in. Or they even call you and pretend that they're with the bank or with your employer or somebody, and they get you to cough up the goods. Well, 1Password is there to help you and protect you from these types of attacks. First of all, you can do two-factor authentication right in 1Password, where they manage the two-factor authentication code for you. It's not related to your SMS, and a SIM swap won't help the bad guys. Another great feature with 1Password is it only offers up the password for the website that it recognizes. So if they send you a fake website that isn't the one that you created the password on, it's not going to offer the password. They also keep tracks of websites that you use that have been hacked. The feature is called Watchtower, and it's awesome. Check Watchtower in your 1Password, and it'll give you a list of any websites that have been recently compromised. It really is remarkable how much damage can be done to you by a hacker if they have your passwords and get into your accounts. And that's why 1Password is such a great investment. They really look out for you. And I use the family plan because I think it's great having my kids and my wife on it as well. And it really has improved our security and safety on the internet. Now, we're at the holidays. It's a great time to set this up for your family. You guys are all going to be in the same room, hopefully, at some point. So you can set up a 1Password for families account and get everybody hooked up. Go to onepassword.com/MPU. Do that in all caps. You'll get 20% off. Protect yourself and your family. Once again, that is onepassword.com/MPU. Check it out today and start securing yourself.
So I want to start with Apple Notes. And I want to talk some about the basic organizational structure of the application. This is, I think, maybe one of the best examples of Apple adding things to Notes over time. So initially, it was just one long list, and then you had notebooks, and now we have notebooks and tags and smart notebooks, like all sorts of things here. But the basic sort of gist of the organization is you have notes and you have folders, and a note can only live in one folder at a time, but you can organize things in sort of a very simple structure. And I think for most people, that's probably enough.
Yeah, and the folders nest, that's so important because if you want to like build one of these over time, you can, make nested folders to, keep some sort of organization. Like when Steven's got 400 notes, you can't just have a list of 400 notes. You got to have some way to get to the ones you want. And I think that was just a huge benefit. They can be sorted by title, creation date, edit date. There are notes apps out there that give you more power on that. In Obsidian, you can write your own code to change the sort date by anything you want. So you're limited here, but the options they have are the ones that you generally want. Like the kinds of data I'm putting in Apple Notes, I've never felt like I needed more. And they also have added the feature where you can pin a note. So like if something is really important to you, you can put it there. As an example, when we were doing the Indoor Studios build, I had that pinned for like 6 months, and I would put punch lists in there for the contractor. I would put links in there. People, were asking me, well, where'd you find that wood in the back? I went and did searches on the internet, and I had like 6 or 7 different vendors. They were all in Apple Notes, and I would go in there and look at them and then share the note and do all sorts of stuff. And you just pin it so it's always at the top while it's active. Once we finished the build, I unpinned it. Now it's disappeared into a folder somewhere.
Yeah, I'm also a big pinned note user, and it's especially helpful, I think, in those sort of momentary, like short-lived times. So like I have a notebook or a folder of event and travel, and back when I was traveling a lot, I would pin whatever current trip I was on, right? Because I'd maybe have stuff for like the next month or the next week or something, and I just wanted to quickly get to what I needed. And what's neat about the pin tabs now, or the pin notes now, is that if you're in a folder that you share notes with somebody, which we'll get to in a little while, it's pinned, I believe, for everybody. So like my wife and I have a shared folder, and we have a couple of really important things. It's just a nice way to highlight something that, maybe before when they were all alphabetical, you'd have to do something like put a number or put like, the dreaded AAA at the top. So it was always at the top of your list. Now you don't have to do those sort of hacky things.
Yeah. It really is. It's really nice. And the feature, the killer feature in Notes, I feel like, is the way it can receive anything as an attachment. And this is one of those Apple advantages, I think. The way with Apple Notes, you can drag in a website, you can put an audio file, you can take one of my favorite features is you can take a email, like let's say you've got a note about something let's say you're gardening and you get a note from somebody that's going to help you garden or some service that you like. You just drag the email into the note, and then later you can click that link and it'll jump you right back to that email. So you don't have to like deal with going through the inbox or trying to search that email again. It's a great feature. And it's something that Apple does particularly well between its applications.
You can bring in all sorts of things for attachments. I mean, there's some obvious stuff, right? Like, oh, I need a screenshot of my movie tickets, or I need a PDF of this receipt or whatever. But something that I use a fair amount is on the iPhone and the iPad, the ability to scan right within a note. So say I just did this the other day, actually. So our daughter went to the eye doctor, her prescription changed a little bit, and we have in our shared folder a note for Allison's vision prescription. And I deleted the attachment that was in there. I had her new, they hand us a written prescription at the eye doctor. Took out my phone, had it on the counter, took a picture of it, and now it's just within notes. I didn't have to find another scanning app or use the camera and then crop it. It's all built in as one workflow to bring things into notes. And it took me 3 seconds. It was fantastic.
Yeah, it really is nice. And even just like the incorporation of pictures is something you just constantly find use for. I mean, there's a reason why Apple built in a custom script to import an Evernote database, because in a lot of ways, this is very much a competitor with Evernote. I mean, because it's not just notes. It is any kind of media that you can drop in there, which gives it certain advantages. Like you can use external media in Obsidian, but I don't think it's as easy as it is with Apple Notes. And like if you're going to do media pictures and media heavy note taking, in a lot of ways, Apple Notes is better. And I think that's kind of what they're aiming for.
I think that really shows in some of the views that are in Apple Notes. So you can view basically by all of your media, and you can even go through there and sort what types of media you want to see. And I think for a lot of people, it's more in line with what they want than something like Obsidian or some other text only, markdown only system. Like part of me really wishes this was just a folder of markdown, right? Like part of me really wishes that, because Notes stores things in like a container and a database, like buried in your user library folder, and it syncs with iCloud. And that's all been great. And have had no problems with it for years and years now. But like the nerd in me thinks, oh gosh, I wish this was just like text files in Dropbox. But the benefit I get of having all these types of media in with my notes is well worth it. Yes, you can do that in other systems, like you said, but Notes makes it so easy. You just drag it in from Finder, or you copy and paste it in, or you take a scan, or whatever it may be. For me, the types of notes that I keep around, that's an important thing.
Absolutely. And there are definite advantages to one or the other. But, Apple Notes is in the discussion. The other thing that you can do with Apple Notes is, it supports the Apple Pencil. But I've got a whole section on that later. But I mean, it just kind of takes anything, you show it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really, really pretty neat. There is a couple other like structural things I want to talk about real quick. One is the recently deleted folder. This is like trash in Finder, but just for notes. I've said this before, so confused about the wording on how Apple describes how this works. And so this is a quote from Apple's own user interface. Notes are available here, being recently deleted, for 30 days. After that time, notes will be permanently deleted. This may take up to 40 days. And so there's a 10-day squishiness in there somewhere. I'm not really sure. But if you accidentally delete a note and you catch it within the first month, it will be in that recently deleted folder. And that syncs everywhere. You can go to iCloud and get it. And that's handy because we've all done it, especially on the iPhone, like you're just kind of swiping around. It's easy to do. And so they're not gone forever. They are stored there for 30 days.
Yeah, I really think this is just kind of a result of them making this as a consumer grade notes app. Mm-hmm. They do the same thing in photos. Like when you delete it, it's not actually deleted, and like you've got to actually address a separate trash can in Photos. I feel like this is in that same category where they're trying to protect you against accidental deletion.
Yeah.
And they're not aiming at Mac Power Users listeners here. They're aiming at people who have never thought much at all about how this stuff works and, casually delete stuff and then realize a few days later they still need it.
Right. But even as a power user, it saved my bacon. So it's a good thing.
Yeah, agreed.
The other thing that I think is important to kind of talk about is the ability to lock a note. So you may have a note, for instance, with a list of medication or contact information. And yes, your phone is protected by Face ID or Touch ID or your PIN code. But if someone has your phone unlocked, you may not want them seeing everything in the Notes app. And this actually got updated with iOS 16 and Ventura. It used to be you just set a password, but now you can actually use Touch or Face ID to unlock an individual note. So out of my 400, I probably have 10 or 12 that I keep locked because what's in there is sensitive. And if someone has my phone, even just handed my phone, I don't want digging around a note and seeing those things. And that's pretty sweet. I would, however, like to be able to lock an entire folder. I could see that being a little bit simpler. Like maybe I would have a folder, named Vault or something. And like anything in there I know is, that folder gets locked altogether. But aside from that, this is a really great feature. And, something, depending on what you're storing in here, could be vitally important to how you use it.
Yeah. Totally. And, these are not beginner features, I mean, we've got more power features we're going to talk about in a minute, but, this is an example or proof of the way this app has evolved.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about data portability. I mean, we've talked about Evernote, how great it is importing Evernote, but at the same time has this proprietary database. Getting notes out or getting information out of Apple Notes. This one is kind of a mixed bag for me. This isn't as good as it could be.
Yeah, I agree. So on the import side, it can import a bunch of different text files. It can import HTML. It can import those Evernote export files, which I just love. I would love to know what the meeting was like at Apple of like, hey, we need to build an Evernote importer. Like someone was passionate about that and got it done. But as far as exporting, you are a little more limited. You can export notes to a PDF and everything kind of shows up as you would expect. But really, you're turning to a third-party solution to export all your stuff from Notes. And we talked about a couple of these apps probably a couple years ago on the show. The best one is called Exporter. I'll have a link in the show notes. And you basically get a folder out in Finder with all your notes arranged in their own like subfolders, and you have all your attachments there as well. There are some others that I don't think do as complete of a job as Exporter does. So that's the one that I like. I would want to color this conversation a little bit with the thought or kind of something I've just kind of come to terms with over the years. It's something like Evernote, right? They use their kind of weirdo Evernote HTML format, and I haven't played with Evernote in years, so maybe it's better now. But for a long time, that was a complaint about Evernote. It's like, well, I can export it, but it's just HTML or these weird ENEX files. What do I do with these? And yeah, you can say the same thing about Notes, but Notes being built by the platform owner gives me greater faith that Notes is around for the long haul than something like Evernote or any other third-party thing, right? Now, the con is Apple may not move as fast as you want to, or you may have a pet feature like I did in Reminders with the badge that kept me from using it for 2 years. But I've kind of just decided over the years between Notes and Reminders and Photos, like kind of just giving up some of those portability concerns if my stuff is in an Apple application. I don't know if that's smart or not, or if other people think that way, but I realized in prepping for this show that I've kind of just given over control of that if I'm using an Apple app, and I'm mostly okay with it.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, the cost, I'm not worried about the data being abandoned. Like I'll lose access to it somehow because Apple, wraps up Notes. But my concern is if I ever want to move out and there's something new that I'd rather use. Like, let's say, oh, I want to do want to put these little personal notes into Craft as well. Well, then it's going to be a big pain in the neck. It won't be that hard for the text. With the tools we've been talking about, you can get the text out fairly easily. You could even probably write a shortcut to get the text out, but it's the unique links, the photos, the media that you're putting in. That stuff doesn't come out easily, and it is kind of a one-way trip in. I say kind of because you can get it out, but it's not going to be a really easy automatic process. So, be warned. But there's a lot of reasons still to move in, like the way you handle text in Apple Notes is really nice. You can write. It's not Markdown, which I really love, but this is very visual. It is a WYSIWYG kind of look where they've got designated text formats: title, heading, subheading, body. They've got bulleted lists and numbered lists and checklists, and so they've got most of the formats you would want covered.
Mm-hmm.
And I would add to that the keyboard shortcuts make it really easy to set those things when you're on the iPad or the Mac.
Yep.
So you can make very quickly pretty looking well formatted text in it, and that's kind of an advantage. And not everybody in the world knows about Markdown, so
Mm-hmm.
for a lot of people this is an improvement.
Yeah, oh, definitely. And it not only is it easy to use, but it looks nice. So if you do make a PDF or you copy and paste it into mail or something, the formatting sticks around because it's this rich text. They also do some clever things like the indenting, and I think they call it outdenting, or it used to be like left indent and right indent. Apple's names for this have changed over the years, but
Yeah.
it's all really easy to do. It looks pretty good. One of my favorite sort of text features in Notes, though, is you can have a checklist and you can set an option to when you check something off the list. So say that for me, I've got some packing lists in Notes that I'm going to eventually move into reminders as templates, which we'll talk about later. But I can, check off microphones, and then it goes to the bottom of the list. And then I can check. And if I uncheck it, it goes back up. Like, they've added some nicety to some of these things where really, as far as text goes, you can basically do anything you want. I mean, they've even added tables the last couple of years. They're very basic. There's no arithmetic or logic in these tables. You can't, do addition or subtraction or anything. It's just, it's really just a way to have some columns and rows. But that was kind of the last big thing for me in terms of what I wanted from text within Notes. Now I want those tables to be smarter because I'd like to do simple math in some of my notes. But they've really, over the years, have made it very well-rounded in there.
Yeah, I mean, and it's not, it's not going to replace Airtable or, any of these cool like online table applications or even numbers, right? But it is there at a basic level. And, the question is, how far do you need to go with this stuff? And I think quite often as power users, we make the mistake of saying, well, I really, really need these extra features. But then you need to step back and look, well, how often do I use those features? And what if I had a better interface, prettier looking, easier to use application, but I had to chop off that top 5% that I use once a year? Well, maybe that's actually a better experience for you. And so you've got to think about it that way. But yeah, it's really nice. One of my favorite features, and this is something that's very interesting to me, is the idea of quick capture. One of the things you want with the Notes app is the ability to capture something. And, the origin for this is the little notebook you carry in your pocket. Like, I know, Stephen, I think you still carry a little notebook in your pocket.
I do.
A lot of people have done it over the years. When I was practicing law at the beginning of my career, everybody had a yellow pad in their hand all the time. And somebody, you'd hear a new fact or something, you'd immediately write it down. And there is something to that analog process of pen in hand, paper in hand, write it down that feels very fluid. And then you switch over to computers and it's like you hear something new you want to write down. Well, I got to find the app, got to open the app. I've got to, a lot of times, create a new file in the app. You can't just write down when you open the app. Drafts is the exception for that. You can go straight into Drafts. But Apple tries to solve that problem with what they call Quick Note. And this has been kind of evolving over the last few years. But, can you capture something very quickly on your digital devices? Well, if you're using Apple Notes, a quick note can do that. And they've got various ways, like you swipe up from the corner with your Apple Pencil and you get a quick note, which is to me the closest approximation of that, that paper experience. But you can also you can add under the control center on your iPad or iPhone, you can add a button that creates a new note. So swipe down, press one button, and then you've got an empty page you can write on, which is pretty fast. And on the Mac, they've got a keyboard shortcut, the function, the little globe key plus a Q. And anywhere on your device, you can hit those shortcuts and it opens up a new note that you can start writing in. I don't know if it's as fast as the notebook and pen in your pocket. I think by Steven's experience, it's probably not. You're still carrying it, but it's close. And if you want to be able to do that on a digital device, Apple Notes is one of the best solutions for this because it's built by Apple, right? And they get that little advantage of being integrated into the operating system.
Yeah, and this year it's everywhere. That started, I think, as an iPad OS feature and then made it elsewhere. Another quick way to start a note is if you have an Apple Pencil set up with an iPad, you can set it where if you tap the lock screen of the iPad with the pencil, it goes to a new note. So like you can turn your iPad into a notebook very quickly with that setting. Yeah, I think that's a huge thing. I think on the Mac, I would still like a way beyond Quick Note to start something quickly. Whether it be a universal shortcut to start a new note or maybe something in the menu bar. Because sometimes, for instance, like you're on the phone and someone starts saying a phone number, right? I got to write it down somewhere. You know where I normally do that on my computer? Alfred, because it's the fastest text field I can get up on my screen. And then I have a phone number as a search in Alfred. That's a bad system. So I would like Apple continue to explore the quick capture area. This episode is made possible by Squarespace, the all-in-one platform for building your brand and growing your business online. You can stand out with Squarespace by building a beautiful website, engaging with your audience, and selling anything, products, services, and even content. Squarespace simply has you covered. With Squarespace, you can sell your products in the online store, physical and digital goods. Squarespace has all the tools you need to start selling online. And you can encourage your visitors to sign up as email subscribers, starting them on the journey to becoming loyal customers. You start with an email template, customizing it with your brand ingredients like colors and logos, plus built-in analytics measure the impact of every send. And those SEO tools also extend to the website itself. You can use a suite of integrated features and useful guides that help maximize prominence among search results. I love building on Squarespace. The holiday sale we're doing with the Relay membership, I built it on Squarespace. It was really easy to make a grid of our images. I have links to them all. It all looks really good. I'm really happy with it. And it didn't take me a week to build. It was just a few hours one afternoon. So head on over to squarespace.com/MPU for a free trial. There's no credit card required. And when you're ready to launch, use the offer code MPU to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or a domain name. Once again, that's squarespace.com/MPU. And when you decide to sign up, use the offer code MPU to get 10% off your first purchase and to show your support for the show. Our thanks to Squarespace for sponsoring Mac Power users and supporting all of Relay FM.
All right, let's switch over to reminders and talk about some of the basic features of reminders that we're excited about. You want to go first?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, I want to start with some of the organization, because reminders gives you a lot of ways to organize your tasks. You can have one long list. You can have as many lists as you want. Most types of lists can be in folders. So you could have like a home folder and a work folder and a kids folder and have different lists within there. The caveat there is that shared lists don't like going into folders. I don't know why. Open to feedback about that over the summer and never heard back, but hopefully at some point you can do that. And tasks within lists can be sorted basically any way you want. I have them by due date, but you can have them by creation date, alphabetical date. You can have them by priority. And each list can be personalized with a color or icon. So we spoke about this on our time tracking episode, where you and I both use certain colors for certain types of work. And so anything podcast related in my system is green. So in Timery, it's green. In reminders, all my podcast lists are green. And it helps me sort of visually remember what I'm looking at, what I'm supposed to be doing. And so you can set those different colors there. My issue with this is that it's twofold. One, you can also use emoji, but then it really like dims out the color where it's kind of hard to see.
Yeah.
But also like Apple has a bajillion SF symbols and there's like 30 in reminders. Like, why can't I use any SF? This is totally off topic for today, but like anywhere I could put a label on something, I should have the full SF symbols dictionary and I should be able to use anything I want. But I can't. And that makes me sad because there's some really awesome SF symbols out there that I'd like to use on my reminders lists.
I couldn't agree more. When I saw this in the outline, I just wanted to write amen like 100 times. And for people who, I think SF symbols is almost an insider thing. So just to step back on that real quick. So several years ago, Apple started making their own kind of glyph set. Like, you want a glyph of a book or a computer or a phone or a little guy running. They started building their own and they called them SF symbols, and you can download them. I don't believe you even have to be in the developer program. I think this is open for anybody, but it's not built into the operating system. So you have to go to Apple and download them. I will confirm that and put a link in the show notes, or you can get them. But it's this great list of symbols, which were really made, I think, for people in building apps, but here's the secret, right? You don't have to build apps to want to use these things. And they paste into your documents and keynotes and whatnot as text. So you just set the text size, the color, and you paste one of these in and you're good to go. But Apple has this rich library of them. And I have this exact same problem when I was using reminders. It's like, man, I know of a symbol that is in SF symbols that would be perfect for this reminders list, but they just didn't give it to me. And it's just like, come on, man, and I wish they'd be more liberal with that list. I wonder what the story is there. I mean, do they have to go to a committee or somebody to get approval for which symbols can be used in which apps? I don't know, but
I don't know.
It's there. It's in your library. It's just give it to us.
Yep. Lists can be pinned. So there's sort of a top section and a bottom section of the lists sidebar on the left-hand side of reminders.
And that really represents to me kind of like the shared feature list that we used to see with the iWork apps, where you get some feature and it goes across. Well, you're getting that with this stuff like too. You have pin notes, pin reminders. All the apps that are getting this special treatment from Apple are getting this kind of common language features, and pinning is one that shows up.
You can also have subtasks, and the way that it works is you have your parent task and you have your child tasks. And if you check off the parent, all the children tasks get marked off. I find that handy for bigger projects that they don't graduate to their own list. Very rarely do I create a list for a project, but I will use subtasks for different things. And it's really easy to do. You can just drag them over and they kind of get indented very easily visually to kind of see what's going on.
Yeah, I feel like this is just a great feature. And this is where you're getting into intermediate task management space, where you can have subtasks and things like that. I mean, that gives you a lot more power in the system. We mentioned it earlier, but there are alerts related to your reminders. All reminders apps have alerts, but none of them have alerts that are baked into the operating system like the Apple task list system and reminders. It's really powerful. You can say, give me an alert at, the due date, which is a date and time, and it shows up. Or you can say when I'm in a specific location. But the one that really blows my mind is like if I relate it to a person and then I'm sending a message to that person, it'll remind me that I have reminders related to that person. I mean, it's crazy.
That is a fantastic feature. And it's really great if it's somebody you don't necessarily talk to all the time. But yeah, it's great. It's one of my favorite alert types. And that's the thing that like no other reminders app can do, because this thing is built into the OS.
Yeah. And the Siri integration in general is just better. remind me when I get home of this or that. I mean, so much so that even if you're using a big boy, level 10 task manager, you may want to keep reminders for some bit of your system because of the Siri integration.
Yeah, you're not having to remember how to pronounce Todoist the way that Siri wants to hear it
Yeah,
for this to
exactly.
work.
Yeah. I mean, that must have been so liberating for you, kind of going to the system reminders list. I bet a lot of the friction points just kind of vaporized for you when you did that.
Definitely.
The data associated with tasks, this is something that's been kind of a growing and improving feature over time. Historically, there wasn't much. You had a task and you had a due date, and then like all of a sudden now we've got this laundry list. Tags are probably the most important. We'll talk about that more later, but you can have a series of tags related to any task, which gives you a way to sort them differently. Multi-dimension organization,
Mhm.
which is really, that's a power feature. That is not a basic task manager feature. You can have associated notes. URLs are interesting. You can put a URL into a task. So you can click into like an email. I was talking earlier about that great thing of linking an email or a web page or whatever, so you can get back to it when you deal with the task. But the URL support in reminders overall is limited. I'm going to talk about that later. But a lot of the a lot of the media stuff we talked about earlier, like images, you can do. They have flags and priorities, so it really is not a basic reminders or task management app. I mean, there's a lot of metadata attached to each one of these that you create.
Yeah, and some of those tools overlap a little bit. Like you can put a
Yeah,
URL in the notes field and it just has the string of text there,
yeah,
but I've got some tasks that have both. And if you
yeah,
put it in the URL field, you also get in the list, you get a little kind of pill-shaped thing and it shows the URL, then you can click on it and go right there. Uh, and same thing, I think, with flag and priority. I think some people would use those kind of interchangeably. For me, in reminders, flags are basically like that is like code red, turn both keys at once. Out of
yeah,
my like probably hundreds of things in reminders, I have 4 things that are flagged. And when
yeah,
those things come up, they have to be done. And it's super important they don't get missed.
yeah.
I'm not really a priority user, but some people will mix and match these in different ways.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, just talking through this, people might think it was a stunt when I said I was looking to replace OmniFocus reminders. No, I was seriously looking at it. I mean, I'm jealous that you can use reminders in some respects because it's just such a simple, easy to use app with a significant amount of power. It's really nice.
Mm-hmm.
The repeating task stuff is good too. Like you can
Yes.
set repeats on a bunch of different criteria, and it's got like a more powerful task app. It has them not just daily or weekdays, but you can say do it on weekends or weekly or biweekly, or even a custom set if you want. And all of this is stuff you see in more powerful task managers. Although it's all indexed on due dates. I'm going to talk later about the problem with defer dates and the reminders app. But if you're okay using it on a due date schedule, it's all there.
Mm-hmm. They've also got some neat things deep in the repeating tasks UI for like set this to be due the last weekday of every month. And so
Yeah,
for me, with just the way Relay's books work, I have something to do the last weekday of every month. And it's very easy to set that. I used to set it kind of like, I'll set it like the 28th and it'll just stay overdue if the last weekdays at 31st or something. And
yeah,
so they've really, if you dig down deep enough, and that is one complaint I have about the reminders UI, is that it's a lot of clicking. Like you go down and down and down and down and down and find what you need, then you back and back and back and back out. But it is all there. And I've said this before on the show, most of my tasks, the vast majority of my tasks are repeating because the nature of my work is cyclical. I have 2 shows that come out every week. I've got a show that comes out every other week. I have a company that pays people every 2 weeks. I've got a company that pays taxes every quarter, right? I have these cycles in my work that repeating tasks are really important. And Reminders has all the features I need to make that really hum for me.
Yeah, agreed. What's the story on data portability and reminders?
It's an interesting one. So there's actually kind of a cool thing. There's Reminders itself does not have any import functionality like we talked about on Notes. But say that you have a bulleted list of text. You can copy that bulleted list and paste it into Reminders, and it makes a list for every bullet point. Not really
Yeah.
import, but kind of a cool way to get a bunch of stuff in if someone emails you action steps or something for a project. But if you are looking to move into Reminders from something else, you're probably just going to be doing it manually, which stinks and takes some time. But I think the reason for that is Notes is a much more simple problem set, right? You've got text and attachments, and that's basically it. Or with Reminders, you have all this metadata we've been talking about. So you have to, there's not like a common way to tell one task manager to another, oh, this one repeats every third Monday, right?
Yeah.
Now, on the flip side, on exporting, say you're leaving Reminders and going somewhere else, Things and Todoist and OmniFocus, they all have different ways to get Reminders data into them. Some of it's with scripting, some of it, like Things, just has a UI for it, and you can move from Reminders over to it. And a lot of third-party apps will use the inbox, and I think OmniFocus does this. Uses the inbox and Reminders as a way to use Siri more easily. So you could tell Siri, remind me of this. It's in the inbox and Reminders, but then OmniFocus or some other apps may look at that and go grab it and bring it in. So there are some holes in the wall to get data through, but all in all, the data portability is not as good as a Notes app. And I think that's, again, true for these whole categories of things.
Yeah. And, that actually doesn't bother me that much. I've always felt like if you're moving between tasks apps, it's really an opportunity to audit your tasks. And even though it's a pain in the neck to spend an afternoon, re-entering things, you'll find that there's a lot of stuff, there's a lot of junk in your task system. That's one of the reasons why I like the OmniFocus review process, because I eliminate the junk that way. But moving between them is also an excellent way to make sure that you're not carrying a bunch of old project garbage along with you, and it's a good way to learn the new system too at the same time. So I don't think that's really a deal killer, but it goes the same the other direction. If you decide that Reminders isn't for you and you want to go to something else in the future, you're going to have to once again probably rebuild the database.
Yeah, you're going to want to put a podcast on and just do a bunch of copying and pasting.
Yeah, or typing. I mean, I really feel like kind of manually creating these things. Mm-hmm. It just helps you, because one of the biggest problem with task managers, especially computer-based ones, is that they can hold an unlimited number of tasks, and we're humans, and we're going to die at some point. We're not going to do an unlimited number of things. So, getting the cruft out of there actually is really good. So, why not? This episode of the Mac Power Users is brought to you by Storyworth. Go to storyworth.com/MPU and give a meaningful gift to treasure forever. You get $10 off with your first purchase. That URL one more time, storyworth.com/MPU. Get started right away with no shipping required. If you're spending time with loved ones for the holidays, chances are you're going to hear a lot of stories. The ones you love to hear, maybe the ones you've heard one too many times, or maybe a few that you've never heard before. But have you ever wondered what it would be like to document those timeless stories? It can be challenging to write an entire book of life memories, but Storyworth makes it fun and easy. This is how anyone can write a book about their life. Every week, Storyworth will email your loved ones a single life-related question that you pick from their collection, like, what's the bravest thing you've ever done in your life? Or, what's the farthest you've ever traveled? All they have to do is reply with a story. Then, after a year, Storyworth compiles all your loved ones' stories, memories, and even photos in a keepsake book. Millions of stories have already been told with Storyworth because they make the process so simple. Get started with your loved ones for the holidays, and before you know it, you'll both be able to reflect on those timeless stories for generations to come. Man, I wish there was something like this when my mom was alive, and I wish I had given it to her. There is, however, someone in my mom's generation still alive in the family, and I am gifting this to her this year. Every time I see her, she tells me crazy stories about my mom. I love to hear those. And also just the way they grew up together during the Depression in Massachusetts. So I think it'd be really fun to give her a year of this and see what she comes up with. Knowing this person, I also think she's going to really appreciate it. I think she likes to tell the stories, and the fact that we value them and we want to put them in a book, I think that's going to really mean a lot to her. So I can't wait to see what this gift produces. So help your family share their story this holiday with a Storyworth gift. Go to storyworth.com/MPU and save $10 on your first purchase. That's STORYWORTH.com/MPU to save $10 on your first purchase. Storyworth.com/MPU. And our thanks to Storyworth for their support of the Mac Power users and all of Relay FM.
So let's get back to Notes. We've covered the basics of both of these applications, but now I want to get into some of the more power usery things within Notes. And I think one of the biggest things with Notes is just how much you can do with keyboard shortcuts.
Yeah. I mean, if you learn the keyboard shortcuts, you can fly in this, especially with the formatting. It's just so much easier to apply formatting with your fingers than the mouse in Apple Notes. So I got those very quickly. It's Command Shift plus something like, and they all make sense. Like title is T, body is B, all that stuff. So as you go through, you can format them as you create them. It's not as fast as Markdown, but it's pretty close, and it does give you that really pretty formatting. If you're gonna go in with Apple Notes, learn the keyboard shortcuts.
Yeah, I've got some set up. I don't think they were there initially. They may be there now, but we talked about it forever ago, how to set custom keyboard shortcuts in system settings / system preferences. And so I had a couple for like dashed list, bulleted list, those sorts of things. And I've got it now where I can absolutely just fly when it comes to formatting notes.
Historically, they had different shortcuts on iPad and Mac, which used to drive me crazy. Like the shortcut for title was different on the iPad if you had an iPad keyboard connected, but they fixed that. So if that's something that chased you away, you're in good shape.
We talked in the previous segment about some of the attachment types you can do, but you can mix and match these. So you can have a block of text and then a photo and some more text and a checklist and a PDF. And it's not a block-based editor like Craft, which in some ways, Craft makes it a little bit nicer because everything is kind of its own chunk and you can rearrange them. Where Notes is more like a traditional document model where you can just have different things kind of in the document directly. We talked about the scanner on iOS, but a big thing I know a lot of people use Notes for, if you're a big pencil user, is sketching. You have within Notes Apple's own pencil tool. So you have different, you've got like the pencil and the brush and the eraser and your color choices and all of that right within the Notes interface. You're not going out somewhere and creating it and bringing it in, although you certainly can if you have a third-party app you prefer more. But it's just built right into Notes. And I remember when they released the first iPad Pro, it was the same year Notes got a refresh. And I don't think that was an accident because one of the first things they showed off with the then brand new Apple Pencil was, and in Notes, you can do these sketches, right? It's Apple views, I think, the Pencil and the Notes app as very close siblings.
Yeah, agreed. And I just feel like Apple treats Notes as like the testing ground or playground of app interactivity. Like the idea that they built that interface for capturing pencil notes, but they immediately installed into Apple Notes makes sense. And then just the whole way you can drag and drop links into Notes. Like if you've got an iPad and you've got an email on one side of the screen and an Apple Note on the other side, you can just drag the email over and it creates a very clean link to that email. And I guess this is a part for me that's kind of a rant. It's like they have the interface now to create a link to an email in Apple Mail. And if you want proof of that, drag an email over to Apple Mail or for that matter, reminders. And the link is there. It looks pretty. It's like, it's not like a bunch of letters and numbers. It's a clean looking link. You tap on it. It's got the little mail icon badge built right into it. But they don't have a way in Apple Mail to say, give me this link if I want to use that link somewhere else. You have to use the Apple stuff to get that to appear, or you have to use the Apple stuff as like an intermediary to get that link. Then once you have it there, then you can put it somewhere else. It's really annoying to me that the code is there, particularly on iPad, to get those links without actually being able to do it directly and just save the link. And like if you are using something like Craft or OmniFocus or any of the other great third-party apps in the world, why can't we get that same, linking without going through, so many extra steps?
Yeah, I think there's room for lots of improvements around all these apps talking to each other better.
But let's talk about something nice.
Let's talk about something nice. Let's talk about tagging. I'm not a tagger. We've talked about this on the show a bunch, but this has kind of become a blessed thing within Notes. I think for a long time there was not a tags interface, but people were just kind of doing it and using the search, which it worked. But now if you have any tags present in your note, which is, the pound sign and then a word, they get sort of grayed out a little bit, slightly different text color, and they show up in the sidebar below all of your notebooks, all of your folders. And you can click on a tag and it will pull up all the notes that have that tag in it, which is pretty nice. So this can be across your folders. Say that you have a tag that is relevant beyond kind of an additional layer of organization. You can do that here. Tag names autofill, or autocomplete, which is fantastic. So you don't end up, the worst thing about tagging system to me is like you have one word and there's like some of your tags are singular and some are plural, but you meant them to all be the same thing. Apple Notes can help you with that. Yeah. And you can delete a tag from the sidebar and it's removed from all the notes that it's on. So someone who's not a tagger, this seems like a pretty complete solution to me.
Yeah, I mean, just like I was talking earlier about how the pinned feature is common to this new generation of apps, Apple Apps tagging now seems to be they have this feature also in reminders. And they use the same syntax, it's just a pound sign with the tag behind it. And it, like you said, autofills, but it also gives you the basis to go a step further. In Notes, they call it smart folders, and reminders, they call it smart lists. But you can create custom auto-populating lists based on these tags, and a lot more, frankly. But the tags, I think, are the real key here. So if you want, let's say that, I don't know, you're doing a bunch of stuff related to your house, but that they're in multiple folders. Well, if you put the house tag on them, then you can create a smart folder that just has everything that has a hashtag house in it, it has the tag for it. But you can also get more clever with those smart folders. You can filter them on creation or edit date, or you can say just ones that are tagged with house, but also contain a checklist, which is a text formatting.
Yeah.
It's actually quite powerful, these smart lists or smart folders that allow you to make a collection of notes together from various locations in your notes database.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, there's like a 10 or 11 criteria you can use, and you have the, sort of standard controls of I want to meet all of these criteria or any of these criteria. We can talk towards the end about some things we'd like to see here, but all in all, I think the smart folder stuff in Notes is really pretty good. And I think would meet the needs of anyone who is using Notes otherwise.
Agreed. Another important feature that is becoming common to this generation of apps is collaboration.
Yeah.
And they have really moved the ball on this. I mean, when it started out, you could share individual notes. A few years ago, they added the ability to share folders, which to me is hugely beneficial. Like Daisy and I have a standing folder in Apple Notes that's just a shared folder. Anything I want to share with her, I just put in there, and it does have things. Yeah, I mean, we just recently realized, one of the credit cards got left somewhere, and so we had to replace it. So I made a note of everywhere that credit card is, on as our a recurring billing card and things like that. So I made a note for that and put it into that shared folder. So, if we have to do this ever again, we've got it. And she has been adding to it as I have, as we've been discovering, where we've got to re-register the card. Christmas lists is another one that's in there. And just like, it's kind of an evolving list of little notes that we share with each other. But, we both know to go there if we have information needs to be shared. But you could do this more. Like you and I do our outlines in Google Docs, but Apple Notes is getting to a point with collaboration where we could probably pull it off with Apple Notes. But if we were to do that, to share each individual outline would be crazy, But if we could have a shared folder, that would be fine, and just anything we put in there is automatically shared. So you could use this stuff for work. On the subject of Google Docs, is this Google Docs? No, it's not. It's not where you can simultaneously type and move stuff around at the same time and watch the other person's cursor. But is it usable? Absolutely. For the stuff we do with the show, like you and I are moving things around in the outline as we are talking into the microphone. So
Right.
me seeing you do that helps me see where we're going and kind of like traffic control for the flow of the show. It's not going to do that stuff, but it's fine. For the stuff I collaborate with my wife, I don't need to see when she's highlighting a word or something. It just doesn't, it's not necessary. And it's been here for years. It works rock solid. And there's more to it than just sharing the note. We also can share edits, and like I can see what has changed. I talked earlier in the show about some of the stuff I'm doing as we've been working towards this show. Like I have a newsletter I've written for MacSparky that I've shared with 2 different people, and I can see the changes they're making to it. And it's working okay. It's not, I don't know if it's the way I'm going to do this going in the future. Historically I've been doing this stuff in Craft, which has some additional features, but it's usable. Especially if you don't do this stuff often.
Yeah, for simple things, it works fantastically. Mary and I have a folder, and I was looking in there as you were talking. We got almost 60 notes in there, all sorts of stuff, all sorts of attachments. And these notes that have collaboration enabled, they have all the same features as regular notes do. When they announced collaboration, I was a little afraid of like, oh, is this going to be kind of slimmed down? But they've done a good job at keeping feature parity between private notes and notes that other people can edit. What about shortcut support? I don't do a whole lot with shortcuts and Apple Notes. For a while, I had a thing where I could share a link and it would append it to a note. But then I sort of changed the way that I do show prep just for myself before in a Google Doc. So, have you explored this recently under Ventura and iOS 16?
Yeah, in Ventura in particular, Apple Notes really got great treatment, and almost anything that you can do with your finger on an iPad or with your mouse on a Mac can now be automated via shortcuts. We got this new shortcuts automation system where developers can donate much easier commands. So it gives you like all sorts of powers. And Apple Notes is a beneficiary of that. The Apple Notes team went whole hog on this, and it gives you a lot of power for automation. So the shortcut story is actually remarkably good for Apple Notes.
I know one thing that that we're going to talk about, and we've talked about a little bit already, is just the ability to like link to an individual note, and that's something you can do with shortcuts, but you run into some weirdness there. So again, it's an area that I would like Apple to keep pushing. And I think there's been a concern for a while about, okay, well, these apps get new features, but then those features aren't exposed in shortcuts for a year or two. And I think that both Notes and Reminders, those teams should take shortcuts integration really seriously, because it extends the usefulness of their applications if you can use them from anywhere.
And I'd say that the Notes team does, and the Reminders team did not.
Yep. Agreed.
And that's just kind of what happened. And it might be they were too busy with other features, or I don't know, internally at Apple, if it's even the shortcuts team or the Reminders team that creates those things, but it's not there. And let's talk. We've been talking next level notes. Let's talk next level reminders for a few minutes. Some of the stuff is repetitive. Tags and smart lists work just like they do with notes. You get a hash designator. They're recognized specifically by the application. And I think with reminders lists, tags can be even more useful than they can be with notes lists, because you often have reminders that want to straddle 2 or 3 different projects or 2 or 3 different areas of focus. And having multiple tags is great, just the same reason that they're great in OmniFocus or any other task manager. Say, give me my low energy tasks. Well, that's not identified to a specific project, but it goes across all projects. And all of that stuff can be set up very easily and filtered into what they call smart lists in reminders. And it's the same thing where they use multiple criteria, not just tags, but the date, priority. You had put a note in the outline that I also bumped into, that there are limitations with these smart lists in the sense of multiple criteria. Like, I think at one point I wanted to say that it's located in this folder or that folder, and it will only allow me to pick one location.
Yep.
So if it's located in this folder, but what if I have another folder I want to look in? Well, it's not going to do that. And it feels to me like, they got pretty far along the path with these smart criteria, but there are like edge cases that it doesn't address where more powerful apps will address that. Like if you look in the perspective settings in OmniFocus, it gives you more power than this is.
Right.
But still, this is pretty great, and it's free, and it's already on your device. So you can't really just dismiss it. There's a lot to it.
Yeah. Yeah. I have some frustration around the parity between smart lists in reminders and smart folders and notes. I would like them to act more similarly. Like, you don't run into some of those things in notes. Also, when you go to create a smart list in notes, you have to create a regular list and then tell it, oh, this is actually going to be a smart list. And in notes, it's under one of the menus of like create smart folder. I would like these apps, like, they're very different. They have very different features, but where the features line up, I would like to see them be a bit more uniform. You pointed out a key example. If you're in notes and you create a smart folder, you can say, I want it to look at notes in these various folders, and you can just add a bunch to your query. And in reminders, you can't, because you can only use a criteria one time, but they don't have the UI that Notes does to select multiple lists. And I get they're separate teams or separate projects, but a lot of people are using these things together, and I think the consistency could be much better.
Yeah, and I think it's a work in progress. I don't think it's done. And the development of these apps have shown improvement over time. It's not like sometimes you get an Apple thing where they put a bunch of effort into it to 1 year and then they never come back to it. It's like, I feel like this stuff is on the way. There's a similar story to be told around collaboration. With reminders, you can collaborate. You can share a list with another person, and either person can check things off and work on the list, but it doesn't have like the types of power features that you get with Notes. And Notes has been doing it longer. I suspect that in a couple of years, collaboration is going to be even easier on reminders and more powerful. So, these things are kind of in motion right now. And what I like is the motion is generally good. Every year it gets a little better. That's why I'm saying 5 to 7 in terms of complexity, because it depends on what piece of it you're looking at. But that might be 6 to 8 in a couple of years, because they just keep improving this stuff. A good example of a power feature they brought in this year for the first time is templates. Templates and reminders make so much sense, right? A lot of us do projects that are repetitive. I make a podcast with Steven every week. The checklist for that is the same. Well, why not have the ability to template that out where I can push one button and recreate the project every time it comes out? And you don't have to just be a nerdy podcaster. You could be an accountant and need the same feature, and it's there now. And you just create a list and save it as template. There's really not a whole lot to it. And then when you go to add a list, it gives you a list of your templates. You tap the one you want, and you're off to the races.
It's really pretty sweet. You could even have that for traveling, right? Like, okay, my packing list is a template and I just add it whenever I need it. And it's a fantastic addition, and one that I would not have expected from reminders, because it is a more sort of power usery thing, but I'm glad it's there.
Yeah. There are limitations on it. Like nesting tasks I found to be very unreliable.
Yep.
But that's just in general is a problem. Like I wrote a shortcut for it to kind of get around it, but that doesn't work all the time. It's just like all of this stuff is a little tenuous because this is the first year that it's live.
Mm-hmm.
Like with shortcuts, another thing there's just like weird little things that happen. I tried to create some templates without the template feature, but just using a shortcut to populate a list. But it builds them from the bottom up instead of the top down. So if I say, if I have a shortcut that says step 1, and then the next shortcut is say, create reminder step 2, and then the third one is create reminder step 3, the list would actually populate to be 3, 2, 1 instead of 1, 2, 3. And I hope that makes sense. But I mean, it just seems like some obvious misses with that stuff, like how a normal person would use it. It's early.
One thing that is unique to reminders, and at least in contrast to notes, is that other applications can basically become a front end for your reminders database. I think the predominant example of this is an app called GoodTask, which uses your reminders database and your reminders list. So if you set something up in GoodTask and you go over to reminders, it's in both places, but it gives you different UI and a lot more tools to manage your tasks. I think my favorite feature of GoodTask is the ability to basically you create sort of like macros, and so you can have a bunch of tasks selected. They call them quick actions, and you can say, okay, I want to take all of these tasks and move them to next Monday, or I want to add this tag to all of these, and then I want to clear the dates. You can build these workflows within GoodTask. I've used it on and off over the years. Reminders has gotten to a point where I don't feel like I need GoodTask on top of it. But if you like the idea of using something that is baked into the OS, but you find either the UI or some of the tools built on top of it a little bit lacking, then GoodTask may solve that problem for you.
Yeah. I do think it's worth checking those out if you decide to go down that rabbit hole, because just like calendar data, reminder data can be shared, and that gives third-party developers a chance to try and improve upon. Historically, that's been necessary because Apple seemed to have no interest in adding like power features to it. I mean, let's go back to our home assistant show or our home automation show. Apple's home app doesn't expose data that third-party apps does. And but I feel like that is a little bit going away here with notes and reminders. Apple is aggressively pursuing these features, and the need for a third-party app isn't there anymore. Like, are you using GoodTasks in as a daily? Yeah,
no.
I mean, because reminders is pretty good.
Yeah, and there are some things that you can do in reminders that have not been exposed, so something like GoodTask can use. If I had to bet, long term, I think GoodTask probably is going to have to move off of this and use something else, have its own back end, basically. Because I could see a future where the reminders application, what it can do, just doesn't get reflected in third-party apps.
Yeah. Well, I for one, was really impressed with reminders. I didn't expect to be, and I was sorely tempted to really try and make it work. But there are things that it doesn't have that I need.
This episode of MPU is made possible by ZocDoc. ZocDoc makes it easy to find quality doctors in your network and in your neighborhood. Plus, with real verified patient reviews, you can find the right doctor for you. ZocDoc is a free app that shows you doctors who are patient reviewed, take your insurance, and are available when you need them. You can find every specialist under the sun. Whether you're looking to straighten those teeth, fix an achy back, get a mole checked out, anything else, ZocDoc has you covered. The mobile app is as easy to use as ordering a ride to a restaurant or getting delivery to your house. Search, find, and book doctors with just a few taps. You can find and review local doctors, read verified patient reviews from real people who made real appointments. Now, when you walk into that doctor's office, you're all set to see someone in your network who gets you. So find the doctor that's right for you, book an appointment in person or remotely that works for your schedule. Every month, millions of people are using ZocDoc. It's their go-to whenever they need to find and book a quality doctor. When we changed family physicians a couple of years ago, it was really important to me to find somebody who I knew before I ever walked in was going to be trustworthy. So I found a bunch of reviews, talked to friends who had seen this person. It makes a big difference knowing that who you're going to go see has been trusted by other people. And ZocDoc makes that really easy. So go to ZocDoc.com/MPU. That's ZocDoc. ZocDoc.com/MPU. Then start your search for a top-rated doctor today. Many are available within 24 hours. That URL one more time is ZocDoc.com/MPU.
All right, so I teased this before the break, but let's talk about stuff that's missing in these apps that you and I would like to see. And since we just talked about reminders, let's start there. I would start with, and this is like a common theme for me, is the lack of URL linking and unique identifiers.
Yep.
This is a problem common to both notes and reminders. You should be able to identify and link to anything in these apps, and you can't. A good example, in OmniFocus, I may have a project. I can create a link to that specific project, and then I can embed it anywhere else on my Mac, click a button, and be right there.
Mm-hmm.
There's just no way to do that in reminders. Some of these apps have the ability to link an individual task, which I don't think is really that useful. You need to get to the list, or same thing with the smart lists. If I created a smart list and I went to the effort to make it, wouldn't it be nice if I could be in Notes or anywhere else on my Mac and just have a button I push that takes me straight to that smart list? Well, there really isn't.
Mm-hmm.
And this kind of gets back to an overall failing with Apple applications, in the sense that I feel like too often they think that your lists are very small, or you only have 5 or 6 of them.
Yeah.
And it just becomes, well, you could just look at it and just click it if you wanted. But then what if you don't click that? What if you look at it and you click something else because you can't help yourself? I mean, I want the ability to laser jump from one thing to the next. And there is no affordance for this in these two applications. And it doesn't even seem like they want to. I mean, with the case in Apple Notes is even just as pronounced, because what if I want to say, every time I come across, I want to write a shortcut. I'm working on an update to a field guide. And every time I see something I want to add to the update, I can highlight it, run a shortcut. It opens that specific update note in Apple Notes and pastes it to the bottom. Mm-hmm. Well, there's no way to do that because there's no unique identifier for the note. I could make the name so unique, I could work my way around it. But other applications have solved this problem with unique identifiers, and it is the superior answer. And it just doesn't seem like that's even on the radar.
Yeah.
And that's a real killer for me. That's one of the reasons why reminders, as much as I liked it, could never really solve the problem for me.
Yeah, even something like Toolbox Pro, which does have some reminder-specific shortcuts. In fact, one, I use their shortcut to create a task from the share sheet. So I've got 2, one save to inbox. The other one is put on my 512 pixels list and make it due today as something I want to link to. And Apple's shortcut demands that you have a time associated with that. I don't want that. I just want due today with no time. And Toolbox Pro has one to get a UUID for a unique reminder, but again, not the list. And I'd like to see all of that. I would like to see much more continuity between mail, notes, reminders, and calendar, so I could tie these things together. I mean, I use your get the mail URL through AppleScript thing a billion times a week, I feel like, because I put emails in tasks and in calendars all the time. And boy, I would like to be able to do that the other way around. And it's a bit frustrating they haven't done it, and that others do it so well, right? I mean, some of these apps do such a good job at this.
Yeah, and what's even more frustrating is I feel like it's under there. It already exists. I mean, for their own internal system, you have to have a unique identifier, because when you push a button, it's got to go to that place, right? But they just don't expose it, and it doesn't seem like they have any interest in doing that. Now, maybe that'll change, but that is a huge stumbling block to me with reminders in particular, but it's also an annoyance with notes. So that's something that I would love to see Apple address.
A couple other things I'd like to see in reminders is faster task creation. So one of the strong points of Todoist was its natural language processing, where you could just type "call David next Tuesday at 3 p.m." Hashtag NPU, and it would put that as a task at 3 p.m. next Tuesday in the NPU list. And
Yeah.
there are a couple of third-party apps that basically do this. I got a link to a blog post I wrote over the summer as I was exploring this. One on the Mac, one on iOS and iPad OS. But I'd like to see Apple adopt some of that because it is great that Reminders has all these features, but it can be very fiddly. And they do have the deal where you call David tomorrow at 3 p.m. and like tomorrow at 3 p.m. will become blue, and on the iPhone and iPad it gets picked up in the quick type bar and you can tap it. So it does recognize some things, mostly just dates and times, which is probably the most important one. But having something where I could really like pick up my phone, enter something really quickly, put my phone back down without a third party app would be nice.
Yeah, I mean, most good reminders or task management apps have a quick entry solution of one sort or another.
And Apple has it in Calendar. Like they have, I mean, it's not great in Calendar, but it's better than nothing.
Yeah. And I guess the best solution would be to create a shortcut, where you could auto-populate some of that stuff. But all this is getting fiddly and unreliable. I mean, it should just be built in. Another just showstopper for me is defer dates. Defer dates to me are so important to my task list. Just as an example, there's a thing I do every year in early November, and just recently I did it. And with OmniFocus, the defer date jumps back a year. So that disappeared off my list. Whereas there's another thing I do in early October, and I had that in my reminders list, and I've set it so it repeats every year. But now every time I open reminders, I see it because in reminders, it's listed as a due date, not a defer date. So it's visible. So anything I do that is, due at some point in the future, maybe it's 3 years from now, because as crazy as it sounds, sometimes I have tasks that have long, waiting periods.
Yeah.
I still have to look at it every day. Mm-hmm. And because they don't have a defer date setting, or a defer date data set, there's no way to hide that stuff. And it's just in front of your face forever. Yep. And, task managers that give you stuff that's irrelevant to today are the kinds of task managers that you stop paying attention to. Seems like a no-brainer to me. But, I don't know if that's even, again, on the radar, because there's nothing in the app currently that indicates they have any interest in doing that.
Something else I would like to see is better feature parity when it comes to list support on Mac OS and iOS. I read a blog post about this. There's a feedback number in that blog post. So, if you can do something about that, look at that feedback number where and it's such a small thing, but I'm a heavy list user. On the inspection pane on iOS and iPad OS, there's a list option. So you can change what list a task is in. And you can't on the Mac. On the Mac, you have to use drag and drop to move a task from one list to another. A small thing, and I think it has come up from the Reminders Mac app and the Reminders iOS and iPadOS app are separate apps, and they've developed differently over time. But I would like basically that metadata view on the iPhone in particular is really pretty good. You get nice switches, you can see everything, and I can't believe I'm saying this because I hate the new system settings, but maybe this is an example where the mobile UI would be the one to go with instead of what's on the Mac. And so I want them to do a better job of this, because Notes, on the other hand, I feel like if you learn Notes on one platform, it's more or less the same everywhere. I mean, there's some differences on the phone because the screen's smaller, but things are basically where they are everywhere. And that's not true with reminders. And I would like more consistency across my devices.
Yeah. Another complaint I have is nested groups. You can create groups now in reminders. So I could have one called personal and one called MacSparky, and then I could have the projects inside that, within that group, or it's kind of a folder really, but you can't nest them. So I can't make one called MacSparky and under that have one called podcasts, So I get all of the MacSparky projects pointing at me every time I look at that list. And I like the ability, once again, to segregate this stuff. The whole idea for me of this contextual computing thing I'm on is is hiding things from me that I don't need to see right now and allowing me to focus on what I'm actually working on. And, getting nested groups of task lists, getting those URL direct links, all that stuff makes me more efficient. And the application, I think that they don't want it to become too complex. And that's why,
Yeah.
maybe that they have no intention of doing that stuff because that's going to confuse more basic users. But that's the thing that keeps me out of using the app at the same time.
So one thing I would like to have in reminders, especially on the Mac, is the ability to change the text size. I feel like the main list of tasks is a bit small. This was a thing in Notes, and at some point they added a default text slider in the Notes preferences, which is not fantastic because it only changes the text size in the note itself and not the list of notes. But making this more accessible in terms of text size would be nice.
Yes, agreed. I mean, I guess we have to be realistic about, what's the intention of these apps. But as they add more power features, I think it's natural for us to say, well, this is what you need to make it better. And I don't want to understate, especially with reminders, how good it is with my complaints. Just because I'm a power user and there are things I want that are not here and may never be here, doesn't take away from the fact that for a lot of people, this is plenty. And I'm jealous of some of the features you get with reminders that I can't get with my app, but my app has the more power features that I need. And me making that attempt last month of switching over reminded me that, no, I actually really do need the power features, but there's a lot to like about reminders.
Yeah, absolutely. It has gotten so good. And it really is kind of finally a worthy sibling to Notes. I feel like Notes, it got rebooted years before this, so they've had more time to work on it. And really, my list of things I'd like to see in Notes really reflects that. I mean, you and I are in staunch agreement about I need better URL linking and unique identifiers so I can get to Notes from other places. Again, there's a way to do that in Shortcuts, but just go read this article that I'm putting in the links this week. It's bananas to get it to work.
Yeah.
For me, I think my lowest hanging fruit for Notes, something I said earlier, I would like to have basic tools inside of those tables. So I could do things like sum or average or median. I don't need numbers embedded inside of Apple Notes, but I would like to do basic things, right? So so one thing I was doing last year was I was tracking my electric bill each month because we put new windows in the house. And so I wanted to see really over the course of, or actually I think I ran it for 2 years, can I see an immediate effect from putting these windows in, right? Not very scientific, but something I was doing. It's I did it in Apple Notes and it was a text list and then I made it into a table, but it would have been nice to have been able to do some simple math on that. And I'd like to see them do that. Craft does it. And I think the way Craft does it is pretty clever. It's not every spreadsheet function under the sun. I'm not making pivot tables in Apple Notes, but some basics would be nice.
Well, the way you said pivot notes, it sounded like you were kind of angry.
Pivot tables?
Sure you are, right?
Yeah. No one needs to make those.
All right.
I think if I was mugged and they said, explain what a pivot table is, or we're going to take your wallet, I wouldn't have a wallet. No one knows how they work.
Actually, they're really not that hard.
Oh, come on.
But let's not go down that road right now. It's really not that hard and really not that necessary. It never has such a big deal been made of a feature, right?
But it's in numbers now, finally.
Yeah. All right. So here's my this is really a reach. But you talked earlier that there's a revolution going on in note taking, and a lot of it surrounds the idea of backlinks and being able to see, where is this note being referenced in other notes? Mm-hmm. That's really what a backlink is ultimately. I like the idea of links. I feel like Apple could do a basic version of this. It doesn't have to be as powerful as Obsidian, but I think even just a basic feature of this would make it nice for people. And a lot of people who have no interest in Obsidian would finally be able to use backlinks and get the benefits. And so I'd like to see them do that someday. But I feel like Apple Notes is getting to the point that could be on the table.
Yeah.
But getting back to our original kind of thesis here, that Apple at some point had a change in philosophy about these apps, that they're no longer going to be just a basic out of the box app that does almost nothing, but it's going to have more features. What we don't know is what the end of that philosophy, where does that end? I mean, do they want to make it as powerful as Obsidian? No, I'm sure they don't. They're never going to have community plugins and, encrypted shared vaults and things like that. But what I do wonder is, are there more features on the list for Apple Notes, which has now been going through this process for a while, or are they just polishing what they have intentionally? Have they said, okay, that's enough? Like, did someone write URL linking and unique identifiers on the whiteboard and someone say, no, we're not going to do that in this. We're not going that far. We don't really know how far they're willing to go with this stuff. It'll take some time to find out, give them a few more years. If Apple Notes suddenly stops getting new features, well, that they've hit that wall. But it is an interesting thing to think about, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And like you said, these are things we'd like to see because we want to see them continue to improve it. But these apps, like, I think the overall story of this episode is these apps have gotten really good. And someone who has a lot of need for apps like this can totally use them. I'm using both full time. And if you had told me that 3 or 4 years ago, I don't think I would have believed you. But the pace of innovation and features that Apple is doing here on both fronts has been really encouraging. And I hope that they do keep it up and they do add these things. And I hope that they look at what's going on in the third party world and, seeing what makes sense to bring into their applications. But just because we have some things we want to see, overall, I think you and I are both extremely happy with how far these have come. And if you haven't looked at them in a long time and you're using something, a third party app, and you're, if you're happy with it, stick with what you're using. But if you are looking at, maybe trying something new or recommending, you're changing what you recommend to people, I think for a lot of users out there, reminders and notes fits the bill.
Yeah. And, to continue the conversation that there was a philosophy change.
Yeah.
Could you make the argument that the philosophy change now also applies to Apple Mail? I mean, we got several new features this year, and that's not everything we'd want, but it feels like kind of the first steps we got with Apple Notes a few years ago and Apple Reminders a few years later. I mean, in a couple years, will Apple Notes be on this path as well? I guess we'll find out.
Sure will.
All right. We are the Mac Power Users. You can find us over at relay.fm/MPU. We want to thank our sponsors, 1Password, Squarespace, Storyworth, and ZocDoc. Don't forget to check those links or get yourself a discount for a membership at Relay FM. Same thing for the discounted field guides and Mike Sparky Labs memberships. We'll put that in the show notes. And on the membership version of this show, which you can will get you ad-free versions of the show plus additional content every week. Steve and I are going to be talking about his weekend project, his charging station. So we're going to get into that next for the more Power Users members. Otherwise, we'll see you next week.